Okay, well, I guess we can get started. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see those of you that have your cameras on, and those of you that don't, I totally understand. We have a lot of Leadership Macomb graduates on with us today, so we're happy about that. And I want to thank you for being here today. It's really wonderful that you're joining us. My name is Karen Smith. I'm the Executive Director for Leadership Macomb, and assisting me today are Julie Petkoff, our Program Manager for Leadership Macomb, and Isabella Crook, our Social Media Coordinator. So I would be remiss if I didn't say a little bit about our organization. Since 1996, over 1,100 individuals have graduated from the Leadership Macomb Core Program. And unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we were unable to have our in-person class this year, but we felt it was really important to continue our mission of educating people on relevant topics. So we developed this virtual series, and this is our 7th topic that we're covering today. So we're really excited that you're here to join us. Today, we're going to be talking about the economic impact that the pandemic has had. And I want to thank our series sponsors, Macomb Community College, Henry Ford Macomb Hospital, Marchand Advisory Group, DTE, Oakland University, Plant Moran, and First State Bank. So Chris Marchand is our chair for today, and he is a graduate of Leadership Macomb Class 22, which graduated in 2019. And we're really fortunate because he's been involved with our organization ever since. He's responsible for chairing our business day session. And this year, because we didn't have an in-person program, Chris stepped up to the plate and agreed to chair today's virtual session. And we're really, really thankful for him for doing that. He's a financial advisor for Marchand Advisory Group of Raymond James. And his dad, Jim Marchand, is also a Leadership Macomb graduate. And we are very, very fortunate at Leadership Macomb to have Jim serve as the president of our board of directors. He's an amazing leader, and we're so lucky to have him. He's going to be one of our presenters today. And we're really honored to have Alex Anderson, the Senior Associate of Public Affairs for Raymond James from Washington today as one of our presenters. And Phil Ruggieri from the CFO for First State Bank is also going to be presenting. We've got a lot of information to cover, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And again, thank you, Chris, for planning this day and for your support and everything else you do to help Leadership Macomb. Chris?
Thank you, Karen. And thanks to everyone who took the time to join us today. You know, in a normal year, our team would be planning a trip for a class tour of an impressive multinational manufacturing facility like Chrysler we've done, or hearing from small business owners about what their challenges and opportunities are in the current environment. But as a substitute for those of you who aren't zoomed out quite yet, we're happy to offer a panel of speakers who can share their expertise on different aspects of the economy and what's happening right now, from a national to a local perspective, and how the recent administration, the new administration, and what the change of administration and their proposed plans can impact where we're going from here. As a reminder, please type your questions into the chat box that you see on your screen. And at the conclusion of our speakers' prepared remarks, we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have available. Our first presenter today, Alex Anderson, is a senior associate within the Washington Policy and Public Affairs team with our firm, Raymond James. That team is focused on in-depth market and impact analysis of policy developments related to elections, trade, banking, healthcare, and geopolitical events. Prior to joining us at Raymond James, Alex worked on banking regulatory issues as a policy analyst at the Institute of International Finance and has worked on Capitol Hill and at the U.S. Department of Commerce. He is a graduate of George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, and he's a current MBA candidate at Johns Hopkins. Alex, thank you very much for being here. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chris, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. We're within the tail end of the Biden administration's first 100 days. So as you might imagine, we have quite a bit of content to cover, and I'll try to be as pointed as possible. And as Chris mentioned, I'll have time to take some questions at the end. So I'll structure my remarks just briefly going over what we see as the top takeaways from the Biden administration's response to COVID-19 thus far, and the key economic policies that they've enacted and how we should think about those going forward. I'll also touch on the developing debate on infrastructure and how we see that developing over the weeks and months ahead. And I'll also touch on what we see as the administration's developing policies towards increasing US competition relative to China and what that means for domestic manufacturing and what incentives we see coming down the pipe for this year and into the future. And I'll jump into here the pandemic response programs. That's what the market has been focused on in the first couple of months into the Biden administration. And we saw a significant amount of focus during this debate on the individual stimulus checks and on unemployment support at the $1,400 per individual level. But really what we see as the key takeaway here being is that this is a test of the recapitalization of the US consumer to the tune of $14,000 per typical family of four in the United States. That's the amount that the typical family of four will get from these programs this year. And to put this into context, we really view this as a first initial test of a system of universal basic income in the United States. Now, that may sound a little bit drastic, but think of this as an expanded social safety net. And to put this into context, we believe these programs are largely here to stay, and that's a noteworthy aspect of the economy going forward, and a significant consideration in any future downturn that we might have. These programs are going to be available for an administration in power to activate, maybe not on the scale that we've seen throughout this disruption, but once the tools are there, they'll be available to use. Just to put it a little bit into context, we saw the Democrats wanting to go bigger on these programs, partly because of the lessons learned in 2008. A lot of senior policymakers that were in position at that time in the Obama administration are now in the Biden administration and have taken the lessons they learned there and are applying them to these programs. Specifically, that's a belief that we did not do enough for individuals during that time period, and a lot of benefits were more focused on corporate and economic policies. We see that the lesson learned there from these officials is that led to a belief that DC does not do enough for individual people, and now we're seeing these programs react to that. So in that context, these lessons are long learned, and they'll be with us for a while. We also believe that these considerations are going to be key to the upcoming elections, both in 2022 and 2024. So expect to see debates and fights over these programs for the years ahead as these become more permanent staples of the economy. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but specific to this is the expanded child tax credit, which might sound like a little hidden part of the tax code, but the expiring deadline here is at the end of this year, and we expect a significant fight over that as a continued support for individuals. And if we go over to the next slide, we cover what we see as the next stage of the Biden administration's economic response here and the development of the infrastructure debate and agenda here in DC. And on this slide, we have our top takeaways for what we see as the funding highlights here. So as a brief overview, the initial phase one proposal, which we view as more of the traditional infrastructure focus, there's around $600 billion for transportation infrastructure, around $500 billion total for programs that increase domestic manufacturing, around $400 billion for increased healthcare access, be that community care or home healthcare. There's programs and funding to address housing supply to the tune of $200 billion, and about $100 billion for water infrastructure, broadband access, education, electricity. Again, what we see as the traditional components of an infrastructure package in DC, and these funding levels are between 10 to 15 years based on how they're scheduled currently. This being phase one, we expect the next phase of the conversation to move more onto the social infrastructure side of the Biden administration's agenda, or the care economy. Central to those proposals, we expect to be universal child care, tuition-free community college, and expanding that child tax credit that I mentioned earlier, as well as a push more on the housing demand side, and we expect a potential proposal there for a first-time homebuyer tax credit of around $15,000. So in all, if we expect a lot of these programs to go forward, and I'll talk a little bit how we see that path developing, we expect this agenda to be in the 3 to 4 trillion range, likely on the lower end of that, but still a significant total at about 3 trillion. And it's also important to think about this in the sense that this infrastructure proposal we really see as the first plank of the Biden administration's foreign policy, in that they view domestic investment and domestic manufacturing as central to the U.S. ability to compete with China for the years ahead in the foreseeable future. In terms of the impact there, it raises bipartisan interest in this proposal, and I'll talk a little bit how that's a consideration that might extend the timeline for this sort of package passing on the next slide here. Before we get to the timeline, actually, we see a big market focus and an economic consideration here with the pay-fors for this sort of package. And our first entry into this debate has been on the corporate tax side. And here we outline a little bit of the first initial considerations. I would preface this by saying all of this is currently under debate. None of this is set in stone, and Democrats internally have a significant amount of leverage to influence these policies going forward. We've seen a lot of focus on the corporate tax rate. The expectations generally in the market are that corporate tax rate from the current 21% will be going up. The current suggested range is anywhere between 25 to 28%, with the Biden administration initially proposing 28%, but moderate Democrats are currently taking that more down to the 25% range. That's where the headlines will focus, but we really expect that the more significantly impactful provisions to be on the international side, and a potential minimum tax for the biggest corporations in the United States. There's a minimum tax proposal out there right now that would apply to corporations with profits above $2 billion, which Treasury currently estimates to be in the range of only 40 companies they're impacted by that proposal. But that's an effort to advance what the Biden administration sees as a fairness aspect in the tax code that limits the degree to which some of the largest corporations in the United States pay a much lower corporate tax rates than they had in the decades previous. And we see a lot of focus on the international side here as well. I won't go too in depth into this. As you can see, there's a lot of acronyms there. But really, that's an advantage there for people that want to change this part of the tax code. It's very arcane. Only people that are really deep in the weeds here can have a big debate about it. So you don't really expect this sort of debate to be a big political flashpoint. But Treasury estimates that this is a significant revenue-raising avenue. We see about $2 trillion targeted from the corporate tax code just on the international side over 10 years. Which would be a significant revenue-raising provision, but we expect to see debates around what the ultimate economic impact of that will be, especially during an economic recovery. So an additional pathway to increasing revenue measures here is more of an investment and focus into IRS enforcement. And just yesterday, we saw testimony by the head of the IRS that estimates that the IRS is currently losing about $1 trillion in uncollected taxes each year. So expect this to be also another avenue to raise revenue for this provision, just through stepping up enforcement and auditing at the IRS. If we move on here on the next slide. We also see a significant focus on what the Biden administration might propose on individual taxes. It's still up in the air whether the administration will pursue something on the personal side, or whether they will focus on more corporate taxes to fund this initial stage of their infrastructure investment. What we've seen floated previously as a return to the top corporate tax rate before the Trump administration's tax adjustments, back to the 39.6% level on the top rate. There could be some proposals to tax capital gains at the regular personal rate, and maybe potentially some dividends adjustments there as well. And really what we see developing right now is a significant focus on the state and local tax deduction. A lot of Democrats are zeroing in on that as a potential avenue to limit the arbitrage in the current tax code, where lower tax states are attracting a lot of inflow based on the provisions in the 2017 tax code that limited state and local tax deductions to $10,000. That's going to be a significant line in the sand for a lot of Democrats. And the fact that Democrats can only lose 2 votes in the House gives Democrats from more high tax states a significant amount of leverage to influence this debate going forward. What we would expect to see there is some sort of compromise. We don't expect a full state and local tax deduction to revert back to the previous method, but perhaps there could be a targeting of reinstating the full deduction for incomes below $400,000, which is emerging as a significant threshold for the Biden administration's tax targeting. On other potential provisions, we do see discussions emerging of a potential financial transactions tax. That's looking unlikely at this stage, but we've seen a couple of market events in the last several months, including market volatility tied to heavily shorted stocks. And events like that further the case in a lot of Democratic lawmakers' minds that in order to limit some of these riskier trades and activities, there should be a financial transaction tax of sorts that raises a significant amount of funding for also what the Biden administration sees as a key to domestic priorities. And we see an estimate here of a potential $800 billion raised from a sort of tax like that. And we're keeping an eye on the timing debate here as well. So the tax debates are typically fluid in terms of when they can be implemented. We saw back in 2017 that end of year passage for the tax reform bill kind of necessitated a beginning of a lot of those provisions at the beginning of 2018. The timing here also lines up similarly, where we expect a potential infrastructure proposal to pass more towards the fall or towards the end of the year, which would make a lot of these provisions likely effective 2022. So if we can move on here to the next slide, we can see how this debate can develop in the weeks and months here ahead. We see an initial preference by the Biden administration to pursue a bipartisan effort here to put together an infrastructure bill, but there are significant hurdles to getting that done. Right now, the pathway exists for a reactivation of the reconciliation procedures, which allow Democrats to pass revenue and spending provisions on a simple majority, which they currently can have in the Senate with 50 votes, with Vice President Kamala Harris serving as the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. But moderate Democrats want to push this in a more bipartisan route, but that would require 10 Republicans to come on board with the Democratic plan in order to pass this bill. If we see the line of thinking that I mentioned earlier on with the discussion of the pandemic response, if the Democrats' desire is to go bigger in the range of $1 trillion to $2 trillion, it's likely not going to be possible to do that with bipartisan support, which raises another reconciliation bill to pass through the simple majority, which would also, with it, likely incentivize more revenue-raising provisions to pass for some of these larger ticket items as part of the Biden administration agenda. We would see the timing for this. There are several deadlines over the course of the year. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has set an initial deadline to get a bill in Congress by July 4th. Right now, we see that as kind of optimistic. This will take quite a while, but there are pressure points later this year tied into the fall, which could incentivize a quicker passage of this sort of bill. If we can move on to the next slide here. So what we outline here is how do we look for these deadlines in DC? Sounds a little bit maybe too simplistic, but lawmakers are also people. We highlight a quote here that during President Trump's last impeachment trial, there was an agreement not to hear from witnesses, even though there was a significant push there because Democrats or lawmakers generally had plans back home. So you see these crunch times in DC that become sort of drivers of progress or drivers to a deal. And we see that here with the July 4th recess, the August 8th recess, and the end of year fiscal debate, which spending bills have to be settled in DC by the end of September or face an extension. And in that timeframe, you get into drawn out spending process and debate, which that's typically when people will want to move on from significant legislation and focus on the funding levels. So we could see a package pass around the September date, which would begin to be effective early 2022. And this is a pattern that has played out with a lot of legislation over the years, which we highlight at the bottom of the slide. Previous Obama era stimulus package passed out on a deadline. The Trump tax cuts passed at the end of December 2017 as lawmakers wanted to go home and enjoy their Christmas holidays. So just something to watch as this debate develops over the next weeks and months here in DC. If we can move over to the next slide, please. So just as we see this debate playing out, these are some of the questions that we will need answers to before we see where some of these provisions are truly heading. Will it be bipartisan, or will it go on the reconciliation route, which is just through Democratic votes in the Senate, and that'll influence the degree to some of the degree to which some of these provisions can be included, as reconciliation is only limited to spending and revenue provisions. The tax rates are still fluid and not settled. There will need to be a debate on the 25 to 28% range. And a little bit more in the weeds here, but the rules surrounding this debate will need to be watched as well, because the current scoring is anywhere between 8 to 15 years, which is a violation of the 10-year window, which you typically have to meet in order to abide by the Byrd rules in the Senate. That could see a push to adjust some of these rules for a longer time period of scoring. And does that open the door to other rule adjustments in the Senate that incentivize more passage of legislation through a simple majority? A lot of times these developments are a little bit unthinkable before they become a reality. So just something to watch in the weeks and months ahead. And just taking a step back a little bit, really what we see from a market perspective here is the expectation is a significant amount of federal funding is coming down the pipeline in the next several months, in addition to what we saw with the American Rescue Plan, which is the COVID-19 response package. Generally, we see some volatility here over the weeks and months ahead, but overall, as the recovery takes shape, we believe this will be another support level for the market. And there could be some inflation concerns as we've seen creep in, but generally the 10 to 15 year time frame here and the support for the recovery, I think we believe will mitigate any of significant volatility here going forward. Just to finish up here, what we really see here, and it's important to remember this context, is really this is an expansion of the role of the federal government, since really we haven't seen since the era of the New Deal or Great Society programs. And this is happening on a bipartisan basis. I'll touch on this a little bit on the next slide as well, but the debate is shifting a little bit in terms of the role of government in DC. Actually, if we could bring up that next slide as well. And a lot of this is tied to an acceptance of that the US is a little bit behind in terms of our technological development and our domestic manufacturing. We expect those to be significant themes here in the years ahead. Just yesterday, there were significant hearings on developing China legislation here in DC. And some of the quotes that we heard coming from Republican lawmakers are that the federal government has a key role to play in incentivizing domestic innovation and manufacturing, which is traditionally not something that we hear from lawmakers on that side of the aisle. So there's more of an acceptance that we need to invest more in domestic manufacturing, in reshoring of supply chains, which is a carryover of a lot of the themes that we saw throughout the Trump administration. So generally, we expect those themes to play out here, and that's also what a significant driving factor that will speed up the implementation of some of these programs. Well, I'll end with here is another aspect to watch in the US-China relationship right now is that a lot of times early on in the first 100 days of a new administration, foreign adversaries will attempt to kind of test a new administration. We haven't really seen that yet with the Biden presidency. And a lot of the focus has been on the more domestic side, but that is a risk that we see in the months ahead, that we will face some sort of significant foreign crisis. Obviously, we see headlines right now of troop buildups on the Ukrainian border and increasing in US, China, and Taiwan tensions. So these dynamics do need to be watched as another potential event here that could pose some market and economic risk. And I'll stop there and I'll turn it back over to Chris, and we can answer any questions on this towards the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Alex. A lot to digest there, obviously. I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions in the chat box. as we go through. And after we get to the end of the speaker's remarks, we will get to as many as we can. But let's transition now from a policy perspective to what maybe has happened in the markets and the economic picture. And here to help us with that is my dad, Jim Marchand. He is a first vice president of investments here at the Marchand Advisory Group of Raymond James in the Macomb branch. He has been customizing investment solutions for successful families and small businesses for over 25 years here in the area. He also had previous corporate finance experience. He received his bachelor's and master's degree in finance from Walsh College. He holds a Series 7, 9, 10, and 65 securities license. It is a licensed life and health insurance agent. He's the former branch manager here in Macomb. And he is, as Karen mentioned, currently serving as the president of the board of directors for Leadership Macomb. Dad, please take it away.
Thanks, Chris. And I think my most proud achievement is being dad. So we'll start with that. I want to piggyback on some of the comments that Alex made and take a look at these from a local content too, from what's happening here locally with Macomb County and residents here, your neighbors, how they invest. But first, I want to say thank you as a member of the Leadership Macomb board for your participation in our program and today's presentation. So let's start with the first slide. And I don't in any way mean to minimize the impact, the human toll that we've had from the virus, but we are going to look at three surges. And the first surge is the vaccine surge. The second surge, and Alex touched on many of these, is the fiscal surge. And the third is the economic surge that's occurred ever since the government started to get involved back in the beginning of 2020. So you can see on the left side of this chart, the confirmed cases are light blue. And look at the variability of that particular line. And the dark is the fatalities that occurred. These are 7-day moving averages going up until March 31st. And I know locally in Michigan, we're having an increase in cases. And I think some of our government officials compared to February of this year, but look at the long-term trend for our nation. And that's happening consistently throughout the country, that typically cases are going down. Obviously, we have a wave here in the Detroit and Michigan area, but look at the long-term trend. We've improved dramatically in the number of cases and the resulting fatalities. Over on the right side, you can see the trend of infected people that have had the disease. So we'll assume they have antibodies, infected and vaccinated, which is the gray bar, and then the green, which is vaccinated only. And look how that's basically just started at the beginning of 2021. So in the first quarter, we have a significant level of people vaccinated already in our country. And we've been told many times that we need to get between 60, 70, 80% zone for herd immunity. So we're well on that path. Using this data, we're about 50% of the population already has some level of immunity. So that's a good sign. And we're vaccinating between 2 and 3 million people per day. Obviously, some need the double dose, but we are vaccinating a significant portion of our population on a daily basis. Next slide, please, Julie. This shows our progress since December in the vaccine rollout. And you can see the US is doing very well compared to the other major developed countries around the world. Only the UK exceeds. The key is, though, the line is going up in such a dramatic trend. You can see the United States is on a good path here where we're heading to a significant level of vaccination. As I said, about 25% of the population has been vaccinated now. Look at what the next quarter could bring. And so our view is we are budding a recovery here now. And we expect to be a return to somewhat back to normal by the fall of this year, based on the trends we're seeing. So we won't be 100% normal, and everybody has their own definition of what normal is, but we will see a significant return to what we think is normal activity as we move into the third and fourth quarter of 2021. That's the vaccine surge. The next surge, please. Next slide. And Alex touched in depth on this. And on the top left, you'll see the federal budget for 2021. They have it's not a calendar year, it's an odd timing, but the key is there's $7 trillion of spending in fiscal 2021 and $3.4 trillion of borrowing. That is significant. This data does not include the infrastructure plan that Alex talked about. So on top of what we've spent already to fight the virus, you're seeing about 3.4 trillion of debt added to our national debt. That is significant, and the top right shows this. It shows the deficits that we've incurred in 2020 and 21 being about 15% of our overall economy. And going back many years, this chart goes to 1990. You can see we've never had that high of a percentage of our GDP. Look at 09 and 10 data for a moment. That's the Great Recession. And about $1 trillion, excuse me, just under $1 trillion was spent during that period of time. So this spending that we're seeing is very significant. Down at the bottom right, you'll see the GDP against our accumulated deficits. Back at World War II time frame, you can see that we had an accumulated deficit of about equal to our entire economic output. Made sense. And now you see in 21, we have about the same situation and deficits increasing as we move forward based on the government expectations. So it's just like your credit card. Sooner or later, you have to pay for this. And how do you pay for this? Well, Alex talked about some of the discussion in Washington on tax proposals. We also believe you might see some increases in inflation. In 1991, the cost of the stamp was 25 cents. And today it's over 50 cents. That is about 2 to 2.5% a year. We see the potential of inflation going from 2 to 2.5 to 2.5 to 3. And so that stamp would be more like 70 cents today. So over a period of time, that does impact what people pay for things. And so we think that we could see higher taxes, as he spoke of, higher interest rates, and some inflation. That's the fiscal surge. Let's look now at the economic surge. Next slide, please. Thank you, Julie. And it's very interesting what's happened. Obviously, on the left, everything stopped, basically. And then things started to come back. Who would think that you could do a mortgage online? But yes, you can. And I'm sure Phil and Jean will talk about the things that they've done to make that possible. But look at the activity of purchasing homes and the mortgage applications. It has been above what the previous years have shown, and it remains there. And as you know, housing prices are very strong right now. What about credit card and debit card activity? Yes, we're Americans, we consume, and we are buying, obviously. So we're buying homes and we're buying things. What are we not doing? Well, the green bar shows hotels, hotel occupancy, and that is down and significantly down. The other lines show a lot of travel activity, again, down. How about restaurants? Still down, and as we know, there's limitations on the capacity restaurants can have right now. So we're seeing that part of our economy well below what it was before the virus hit. That's a concern. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight 3 different times. And so if you look at the top and the second circle from the right, which is the last major decline, or I should say the first decline of the year 2009, and that was 2000, 2001, and 2002. And so a little history lesson, that was the terrorist attack, the 9/11, the tech bubble, Enron's collapse, and the war starting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it took about 3 years for all those things to happen, and the market declined about 49%, significant. Now let's move over to 2009, the next circle to the right. And you can see about 2 years, the market declined 56%. And that was a result of the Great Recession. We know the problems, the financial issues and the housing issues, mortgage, layoffs, and so forth. Very dramatic, 56% decline there, 49% the previous one. And now the last circle on the top right is what we just experienced last year, 34% decline in the market in a very short time, just a little bit over a month. And so we did have this V shape that many people talked about in the market and in the economy. Why was part of that recovery happening? Well, people adapted, they used technology, and the government supported some of the things that Alex mentioned previously. But it was very sudden. In really a 2-month period, we experienced a significant decline. Now let's look at the next chart, please. And this is unemployment. And it's hard to believe, but from the Great Recession in 2008, 9, and ending in 10, until the virus, we created as a country about 23 million jobs. And those were all lost in those 2 to 3 months of last year. And so you see this dramatic decline in employment. About 150 some million Americans were working, and 2 months later, about 130 some million Americans were working. And where did that happen? Over on the right side, you can see by industry segment. And I mentioned a moment ago, hotels. And so leisure, hospitality are down and still down. This data is as of February of this year, but still down from employment. Obviously, one of the benefits is no one comes to Macomb County for tourism, right? Your relatives don't say, hey, I'm coming to see you because I'm going to Macomb County for tourism. So we're not a high tourist destination. So we didn't experience some of the declines that other places around the country would have experienced. But we did have manufacturing, professional services, construction, and so forth that held in there to some extent. So it's one of the strengths here in Macomb County. We don't have tourism. We did have businesses and industries that tended to weather the storm a little bit better. Next slide, please. What are some of the keys to Macomb County's success? And it's something that we've talked about and everybody's talked about for years. It's education. We have a fairly high K through 12 graduation rate. We have an excellent community college, Macomb Community College. And I'm not saying that just because Jim's on the line today. We have Oakland University, and many folks from Oakland University are participating. And Macomb has developed partnerships with other universities. So education has made a difference and stabilized Macomb County's reaction to the virus. You can see here, less than a high school degree, 10% of our neighbors lost their job in February of 21. Yet if you have some college or graduated from college, you're down the 6 to 4% range. So educational attainment is critical to keep the economy stable. We had that here in Macomb County. And over on the right shows the earnings. High school graduate typically across the country earns about $40,000 a year, where a bachelor's degree is in the 70 range. And so Macomb could obviously use more education, and never enough, I would say. But because we had some going into this, preparing ahead of time, we did fairly well coming through this pandemic. Next slide, please. I wanted to shrink the whole year since February 19th, when the pandemic just started to become known, to today, and look at some of the things that have happened. Now, on February 19th, if you had $100,000 invested in the market, the S&P 500, your experience was the green line. And in 1 month, it dropped to $65,000. It took all the way to August 10th to recover. Look at the light blue. That's where individuals were more conservative, and 100,000 dropped to 80. Now that's still significant, but it was a lot less than would have occurred in the market. And it recovered more quickly. You can see by July, we recovered. And that's indicative of many of the people here in Macomb County. We tend to be more conservative in all aspects of our life. So with our investments and with our education and putting money in the bank, and hopefully it's for state, we tend to be more conservative. So it's kind of interesting how Macomb County and the rest of the world has reacted. Now let's look forward. Let's go a couple pages in, please, Julie. And I want to look forward at a couple things that have happened. And I want to look first at the agricultural age. That was for centuries. Basically, you grew your own food, maybe you had enough for your local community to sell some, but that lasted for centuries. And then the industrial age occurred, probably in the 1800s. Then the informational age occurred, and that was probably 1950, 1960. We're in the innovation age. And that was one of the key areas that helped us develop this vaccine in a relatively short period of time. What are some of the aspects of the innovation age? Connectivity, autonomous vehicles. You can go over to the tech center there on Van Dyke and 12 Mile, and probably you can't get in, but you can see autonomous vehicles being tested right here in Macomb County. And 5G, of course, that's across the globe, but that's also helping. Virtual reality. Leadership Macomb Group toured the General Dynamics facility a few years ago, and we had specialized glasses put on us where we had a look at what a Stryker vehicle would look like from the inside and what your vision would be. So those things are happening right here locally, and we're fortunate with Leadership Macomb to visit some of those. And Zoom, what we're doing right now. In 2019, there were 10 million Zoom sessions a day in the United States on average. In 2020, 300 million Zoom sessions a day, a dramatic change. But that preparation happened way ahead of the pandemic, but allowed us to work and live through the pandemic. What about digitization? Well, we've got mobility. Obviously, many people are working from home or various locations. Logistics, the Amazon facility in Shelby Township wouldn't exist without the ability to manage movement of product. Maybe you've heard about this online gaming that's come to Michigan. There might be an advertisement or two that you've seen, but that's another aspect that's changed dramatically. Cloud computing, robotics. A few years ago, we visited Macomb's robotics training area on Van Dyke, and I think it's about 10 or 11 mile. And so robotics is a big thing here in Macomb County. And again, Leadership Macomb visited the Chrysler facility where they were using the robotics. So many of the technologies that have been developed over the past are used right here in Macomb County. And that's one of the reasons our area has recovered so quickly. Intellectual capital. 10,000 scientists, data analysts worked on the vaccine development. Moderna isolated the cause of the vaccine within 2 days of starting their tests. It took them a month to start to develop treatments, but it was amazing how fast that happened. Why did that happen? Because of the things that I mentioned up above, the ability to share data and to do it on a global basis, and artificial intelligence. What about globalization? This has impacted Macomb County, and I'm using one example here. Walter P. Chrysler started the Chrysler Corporation, and then Daimler and Chrysler combined, and then Fiat, Chrysler combined, and now Joe's entering the picture. Globalization here is impacting Macomb County too. So looking forward, the three surges that we've seen, number one, the vaccination surge, which will allow us to get back to normal, somewhat normal, by the second half of this year. The fiscal surge, as Alex mentioned, some of the spending now that has occurred and in the future. And of course, higher inflation, higher taxes, higher interest rates probably. And then finally, the economic surge as we've spoken of. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chris and we'll take some questions, I believe, at the end, as Alex said. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And yeah, another great presentation, a lot of information there. I'll remind you again, sound like a broken record, but if you have questions, please put them in your chat box, particularly maybe on the agricultural age. That seems pretty interesting. We glossed right over that. But our next presenter has a perspective that can really kind of bring it home in more ways than one. So take maybe what we've talked about so far on a national level and maybe bring some light on some of the impact on local business from a local business that services local businesses right here in Macomb. Our next presenter is Phil Ruggieri. He's got over 35 years of banking experience at First State Bank. He's currently serving as the bank's chief financial officer. He's also an adjunct business instructor at Macomb Community College and a faculty member of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program in Detroit. Phil's a longtime member of the Detroit Economic Club and the East Point Rotary Club. He earned his bachelor's degree in finance from Walsh College and an MBA from Oakland University. He holds his Series 7 securities license and is a graduate of Leadership Macomb himself. Thanks very much for pinch hitting with us today, Phil.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's great to be here today. Considering, yeah, a graduate of Leadership Macomb 20, so it's very exciting to be part of this. So thanks so much for inviting me. Just want to start off, for those of you who don't know, First State Bank is, we're proud to say, is Macomb County's hometown bank. We have been in business for 103 years, and we provide financial services to the communities we serve. We have 11 branches in Macomb County, and our newest branch is in Rochester Hills. So yeah, it's great to be here today. I just wanted to basically cover the timeline for our involvement in the COVID relief, how we experienced things, how it's affected us, and what we've done, to deal with it. First, what was our preparation? Well, effective communication was very, very important. Like many other businesses, we didn't have much time. This kind of crept up on us rather quickly. And so what we did was we got together some key areas of the bank and got some communication together. Those areas were mainly IT, human resources, branch management, branch administration, and security. And what we did was we created really two specific teams to deal with this COVID-19. One of them was called the Return to Work Committee. And what this committee did was ensure that we maintain proper health and safety protocols. And then the other, of course, was a group to address customer needs. And of course, that has to do with the PPP program, as well as accommodating our customers with payment assistance plans and things of that nature. So we did develop a couple of groups, a lot of communication going on over several months. And of course, the communication was all virtual. So that's been a very common theme for us, as well as many other people. The next thing was, what was the communication with government? The county government reached out to us fairly early to assist in one of their grant programs that was offered through the state. And we did work with them to help them through that process. So we did participate in that. We also maintained regular contact with the Small Business Administration. Obviously, the PPP program was through the SBA, so we're in constant contact with them. to the extent that we were able to offer these funds to local businesses. And then finally, our regulators were in regular contact with us as well, primarily to monitor our own financial health. So they had a pulse of how things were going in banking and how it was affecting us financially. So constant communication with regulators as well. What changed with our bank operations? Well, that's pretty obvious for all of us that know work from home. You know, typically in our headquarters, I would say probably about 20% over this last year, about 20% of the employees that work in our headquarters worked in our headquarters. So the majority worked from home. Some came in on an occasional basis, but for the most part, those that were able to work from home certainly did. And really the health of our employees and our customers is top priority. We've certainly believe in that. And we work to ensure that we complied with applicable state and federal guidelines and then some. So obviously limiting social contact, limiting access to buildings and offices, work from home, providing sanitizing lotion, face masks, etc. Our branches, we have 12 branches, and we certainly encouraged our customers to use the drive-through. There was a period of time where our branches were drive-through only, and then of course, certainly limited customer availability to come in. We only had allowed so many customers to come in at a time. So we encouraged our customers to use the drive-through, and actually that worked out very, very well. Many of our customers didn't realize they could do more complex transactions through the drive-through. We're able to open accounts through the drive-through if need be. So it turned out that I think customers realized that going into the branch wasn't necessarily required as they always had thought for certain things. And then, of course, we took advantage of our digital presence to post as much information to the public as possible. Some of the things that we did, we established a COVID landing page that provided resources to our customers, updates on the PPP program, how to get help or ask for loan forbearance, a lot of information about grants and other local programs. So our marketing department did a terrific job in creating this fsb.bank/COVID-19 landing page, and it provides a lot of information. In addition to that, obviously, emails to customers, updating them on our branch closures, our branch status, web alerts, local branch web page updates, and social messaging on Facebook and LinkedIn where applicable. So we certainly got the word out. We communicated with our customers as to what's going on, and they had lots of information to help them get through all this. The next question here was what was changed in bank operations, or actually how did we pivot to serve customers and protect them? Well, we did work to accommodate our customers. We worked with our customers with deferred payment plans, with forbearance plans, and then we even, for a period of time, we waived late fees, overdraft fees, and things of that nature. So we certainly did work with our borrowers. We understand that they went through hard times, and we did as best we can to make sure that we can accommodate them. And then obviously the PPP program, the Payroll Protection Program, which was in the news everywhere. Our bank was a major participant in that program. In the first round, we had well over 400 customers that we took care of with that program. And now in round two, we have another decent amount, not as many as the first round, but we want to make sure that our customers are provided the financials, that the funding that they need. Okay, the next question I have was, what's different about this relief than typical underwriting and due diligence? Well, as a bank, we've established varying levels of underwriting and documentation standards. But generally, these are risk-based standards that we follow to ensure we maintain a high-quality loan portfolio. But with this risk of this pandemic, a lot of things have changed, as we all know. So what's happened was the SBA, as well as many other government agencies, has modified their requirements. So we have followed suit with that. So many of our loan requirements have been relaxed based on SBA and government-sponsored agencies changing theirs as well. We think this is most appropriate given the nature of the crisis. We want to make sure our customers are taken care of during these difficult times. Next thing we have is success stories, and I've got a real interesting one. You know, we all think of during these hard times, our businesses, many businesses have struggled. And here's one success story that I think is real interesting. One of our local customers, business customer in St. Clair Shores, they are an optical company, and I think they're a great example of a business that was able to adapt to changes and actually came out ahead. So there was a period of time last year where you could only go in for eye exams or glasses. There was a period of time for a few weeks where it was only for emergency only. They were taking no appointments. So when COVID hit, they were completely shut down for everything except for emergency services. And they had to make some unexpected changes to their business plan. And so what they decided to do is they had unused portion of their building and they turned it into a lab to make their own lenses, which they didn't do previously. So this new investment in new equipment created a new income stream. And it eliminated the dependence on outside providers to provide those lenses. So what happens is now that they've created this new line of business that they hadn't planned on doing, so the COVID actually helped them to a certain extent with that. So now they're continuing to do that, not relying on outside business, not dealing with staffing issues and shipping delays, and they are actually producing the lenses in their office, all because of the COVID situation. So I think that's a great success story. There are others that businesses adapted and changed their way of business, and that was just one that we had locally. Overall, how did our customers react to changes? We think overall very, very well. Our customers understand the importance of this pandemic. They understand the importance of wearing a mask and social distancing. So generally in crisis, people do exactly the right thing. That's a general, we think. And certainly with our customers, we have seen that. We haven't had really any issues about, limitations in our branches or anything like that. So our customers have basically reacted very positively. And they really appreciated the communication that we provided to them through our website and through all the social media. So that's been a positive. What's the status now and outlook from this point on? Well, we have opened up our branches for lobby traffic. As I said, there was a period of time last year that we were closed for a short period of time. We do have obviously social safety practices. They remain in place. Once the vaccine process is open, now that it is open, we hope to actually later this month, we're going to have vaccinations here at the bank for our employees. So we're very excited and very optimistic that the more people who get vaccinated, we'll get back to normal sooner rather than later. What has changed for First State Bank in a post-pandemic world? Well, I suspect many changes we will see were underway before the pandemic. The online banking, all those types of things were in place, but this kind of just expedited it. Those people who couldn't or were reluctant to go into branches, I think this just kind of sped up the process. It accelerated the process. of just online shopping, remote work, remote meetings, remote banking. And from our perspective, we place a lot of value on community-based activity. That's what we are. We're a community bank. So what we're hoping that won't change. And in fact, we are committed to working with our community partners, and we did not pull back at all on our support or engagement. So even though we had this limitation of face-to-face contact, we still kept going with our support for local community. In fact, we increased in some cases our support for the sake of continuity in our community. So we think that is very, very important, and we certainly didn't slow that down one bit. I believe those are really the prepared questions that I were looking to answer. So with that, Chris, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I really appreciate you taking part in today's presentation. And also, I want to mention from the chat that Hearts for Homes, Richard Cannon said they're grateful for First State Bank's 2020 Thanksgiving Award to help families that lost income due to the pandemic with rent assistance to prevent families from becoming homeless in Macomb County. So I know that First State Bank has been very, very generous with some of their philanthropy, and that's a testament to you and Gene and everybody over there at First State Bank. So we did get some very good questions. We have one question that came in the chat and a couple that came to me before we started. So I'll start with one that kind of straddles both lines of that. Mike has asked Alex, right after Alex's presentation, how do we see inflation playing out into all this spend? And I'm curious also what might happen, how might that affect the administration's plan if they do start to see inflation as they implement all this infrastructure?
Thanks, Chris. Generally, right now, we don't see inflation being that significant of a concern for policymakers and Biden administration officials. There's a couple factors underlying that. First, I think the belief is really that any inflationary pressure is going to be transitory and based on where the economy is currently due to the pandemic disruptions. They expect that the biggest pressure points to be in supply chains that have been disrupted or with the increase of demand in certain sectors that Jim highlighted that see an influx of demand with their recapitalization, the reopening. So as the recovery takes shape and the reopening takes shape, policymakers generally consider those as pressures that will ease and see a more return to baseline levels. The second point here is that the person with the most credibility on these issues is Fed Chair Powell, and he's someone that's been really not concerned about inflationary pressures in the economy and has been almost urging lawmakers to make these investments into the economy well before the pandemic. I mean, there's obviously the situation is different now with the levels of spending that we've seen, but he's been someone on the forefront of urging a more significant level of spending into infrastructure and some of these recovery programs that will set up the economic recovery in the years ahead. So really that's how the inflation debate is being framed in DC.
Thank you very much. Also, before we got into the chat, which there's still probably time to get a question in there if you have anything on your mind. Dad, you were asked, are there areas of investment that you're looking at coming out of the pandemic that look particularly strong or particularly weak relative to others?
That's a good question. And, you know, as Alex pointed out, if there's tax increases coming down the road, some people look for tax efficient investments. So tax-free bonds are a place that you could consider. That gives you an opportunity to get some income and some stability and avoid some of the significant tax increases. Looking on the equity side in the 3 to 5 year time horizon, you know, a lot of investment that happened before the pandemic in technology will continue into the future. So we believe in technology. We believe that's a good growth area. And also, if you looked at the chart on the vaccinations and you notice that some countries are well behind the United States in the vaccination level, they're also behind the United States in the fiscal support. So we would think that some international investments should do better as we move forward down the road, 22, 23. So I think there's some opportunities, as I said, in tax-free bonds and in some US segments in technology, and then some recoveries in materials, things like that as infrastructure goes forward, and in international. So a couple areas, but obviously you need to consider your risk because the market hit a new high today at 34,000. And so we expect some volatility. That's always the case. All those circles you saw in that one chart. And I would mention that these charts are available. If you want to contact Julie, we can actually send those charts out to you so you can take a look at those in more detail.
Just to follow up, I don't mean to interrupt you, Chris, but I did get a question directly to me, and it was kind of piggyback that a little bit for both Alex and Jim. Do either of you foresee another possible recession in the near future?
Well, Alex, I'm off mute, so I'll go first. Did anybody foresee the virus come forward? No. Did anybody see the financial crisis in 08 and 09? No. Did anybody foresee the terrorist attack in 2001? No. So typically it's difficult to plan and say, I see a recession coming. In fact, I would say the exact opposite. We see a strong recovery, as I said about the surges, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare. A lot of things that Phil talked about that the bank was ready to do is because they prepared ahead of time. They had the ability to develop a new landing site. And I think that's important in portfolios. It's important in your own personal professional career. And I think that's extremely valuable as we go through a crisis or some kind of chaos. So yes, recessions will occur. No, we don't think there's one likely on the horizon, but there's always the event, maybe an international event. Alex in his talked about some of the geopolitical possibilities. So there's always those things that could occur. And we always recommend prepare ahead of time. Develop your Zoom ahead of time. Develop your team, your portfolio, your strategy ahead of time, because the cause of these sometimes not known.
I would generally agree with Jim on the economic fundamentals and what we're seeing right now taking shape. The one thing I would raise a little bit of concern over is that we're really not out of the woods yet in terms of COVID, even with the positive vaccine data and the recovery taking shape. There are some concerning variants emerging, and we really can't foresee how that situation is going to play out. And risk is there that the top scientific minds have flagged that there could be vaccine resistant strains that take hold. And really, I would see that as the biggest risk to the recovery going forward.
That sounds like a nightmare. Okay. Do you, Phil, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the relaxed loan standards that have become normal during the crisis, and it seems absolutely necessary and prudent, but do you expect that to continue for how long? Do you have any thought about what the implication might be as we hopefully come out of the pandemic in the near future?
I'm sorry, how long, what would continue?
The relaxed loan standards.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was really trying times last year during a period of time. And we certainly jumped in and helped many of our customers. Going forward, we think things are getting better, and we certainly will accommodate customers as needed. But going forward, we think things are kind of on the rise and we won't see as many requests. But I know last year, we certainly did help our customers get through this. And I think things are just getting better. So I suspect, I hate to put a time on it, but I just suspect that going forward, we'll have less and less requests and have less and less need to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. One final question that we got here for Alex. You mentioned some of the electoral implications, particularly Democrats arguing over maybe some of those state and local tax laws that might change. Do we have any idea about some of the electoral implications of what, likely negotiation in some of these tax raises or other provisions for infrastructure spending might have in a little bit more piecemeal, or what might the negotiations yield and how the electoral implications of that in both the midterms and next presidential election might unfold?
Sure. Two ways to frame this debate. One, the fact that Democrats do have majorities in both the House and the Senate obviously speeds up some of the pathway to some of these changes. But like you mentioned, that there might be electoral consequences for that. So two ways to think about this is either there's a moderating force that people look to those potential electoral consequences and find more of a middle ground. Or we've seen historically that the party in power typically loses seats in the House and Senate anyway. And if Democrats take that view, then this might be the opportunity for them to enact the changes that they see as necessary and generational changes. And I think that's really the way to look at it right now. The other point is that I think generally Democrats view this as a once in a generation opportunity to enact some of these things, which I think ultimately will speed up the passage for some of these programs and tax increases in the months ahead. It's the opportunity is fairly limited, and you never know how long you hold on to these majorities. The split in the Senate is really 50-50 right now. So the loss of any one senator takes us back down, and no one has a majority. There's only 2 votes in the House right now that Democrats can lose out of 200 some Democratic members in order to pass legislation. So the forces are there to moderate, but ultimately it might not matter at the end of the day.
Great, thank you very much. Very interesting insight. So I think that's where we are. We didn't got any questions right at the end here. So in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you to everyone over at Leadership Macomb, both for the opportunity to be part of today, present today, but also the opportunity to connect with leaders and local organizations and learn from them, as well as experience things here in the local community that I don't think I would be able to experience in any other way. But as far as today, I'd like to thank a few other people that have helped us get this whole program together. Karen, Julie, Isabella, as well as the program council at Leadership Macomb, Amy Person, Jean Lovell at First Aid, Vicki Rowinski, Jennifer Anderson. And I'd like to thank our 3 distinguished presenters one last time, Alex Anderson, Jim Marchand, and Phil Ruggieri. Thank you everyone for your time for dialing in, and I'll turn it back over to Karen.
Well, I want to thank everyone again for being here, and Chris, Alex, and Phil. Great information, and Jim. I have probably 2 pages worth of notes here. So, as a nonprofit, we've all had some kind of economic stressors over the last year because of the pandemic, and I know that from Leadership Macomb's point, we're so grateful that we were able to get the payroll protection loans through First State Bank, because they really sustained us through the year. And without them, I don't know if we'd even be here. So First State Bank is very, very generous in their community giving, and they've been a great partner of ours. We're thankful for our sponsors that continued to sponsor us this past year, even though we weren't offering an in-person program, which really says a lot to the value they see in our program. So that's really important to us. And I want to just remind everyone that our next session is going to be on May 6th, and we're going to be talking about the environment. So Lake St. Clair is such an important part of Macomb County, and we're going to be talking about everything from water levels to fishing to boating, everything Lake St. Clair. So we've got some really great speakers lined up for that day. And we are also, as of right now, planning to have an in-person class next year, starting in September of 2021. So we will be having applications available on our website very soon, and we're encouraging anybody that's interested to sign up. We're also going to be doing an informational Zoom session about what our program does sometime in June. So I'll be sharing more information about that too. But I just want to once again thank everybody, and it really means a lot that you tuned in today, and have a great day. Thank you.